Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host Jason Bougger.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Jason. I'm here with our co-host Scott Michael Childers.
Hello.
Hello.
Today I'm taking over the main chair. If you listened to our last podcast, Jason grilled me on self-publishing, and now I get to return the favor and talk to him about his current small press project that he released not too long ago. Or maybe it is long ago, depending on when this podcast actually gets released.
It's going on a year.
Okay, then. So, again, self-publishing last time, now it's small press. We're moving up in the world. So, Jason, tell us a little bit about the project and why you chose to go with a smaller press than the traditional big press.
Okay, I've got some valid reasons.
All right.
Real quick, I'll talk about the book. It's a young adult paranormal. It's called Holy Fudgesicles. I have links to it on the page. I wrote it as an NaNoWriMo, and it was my first successful attempt at finishing a novel. I got done with it, and I read Stephen King's About Writing. He said your next step after you have a good novel is to try to get an agent. So I spent, I think, exactly a year. I sent out a query letter every week. So I sent out just over 50 query letters. I got a couple of full requests. Scratch that, I got one full request, but it was from a pretty high-profile agent, so I danced around. I was pretty happy for a month, and then I got a really good rejection from them. I pitched it at a writing conference in Denver. I got a really detailed rejection to it then. But while I was at that conference, another writer there suggested, well, why not look at some small press? You can send them the manuscript. And so I just searched for a few. The one that took me was Wingsy Press, and they've been pretty good. They did a great job on the editing. They put a cover on it, and it's, I didn't have to buy any minimum copies or anything. It didn't cost me anything, and it's a royalty only.
So no advance.
No advance.
But also you didn't have to pay them.
Right.
Which is something to be wary of as quote-unquote small press, asking you to pay them to
that's true. There are a lot of times I think there will be vanity press. There's just some bad companies who will disguise as traditional publishers and ask for money up front, and legitimate book publishers shouldn't do that.
Okay. So with this small press experience of yours, did they ask you to do anything that you wouldn't have expected out of, say, a traditional publishing contract? Like they didn't say, okay, you've got to pay for, or you've got to design the cover for us, or anything like that?
No, none of that. What they did was they had in-house editors. They assigned one to my book. So she contacted me right away and said she'll send me suggested edits soon, and then I'll get back to her. And it was up to me to either approve or give a detailed reason on why I won't approve. There were only one or two things I had a problem with, and in the end, the editor was right, surprisingly. But she was right. And then after I went through the editing, then it went to another copy editor for proofreading, punctuation, things like that.
Sure.
They hooked me up with an in-house cover artist, and I worked with her and got a decent cover. And that was about it. My only complaint about the process was where you may say traditional publishing is slow. This was anything but slow. It was, here's your edits, get back to us in 3 days. There was a lot of rush to it, so I think I took a day off of work even to finish those edits up the first round.
Well, here's a question, and it may not survive the editing process. Do you know how many titles the small press puts out? I mean, when we talk small press, what do we mean?
Oh, yeah, the volume of this one. They have their Wingsy Press. They have over 300 authors. They've been around since 2001, and they publish between 2 and 4 books every month. I believe they started off as more of a romance publisher, and that's still their big thing. My young adult book, there's not a lot of young adult books under their publishing house right now.
But they are completely independent. They're not an offshoot of one of the bigs.
Right.
Okay. So what has your experience been like now that it's finished? You're a year away from release date. Are you still in contact with them? Is it still a relationship, or is it a one and done type of thing?
It is a relationship in the sense that I signed a 2-year contract, and that contract, it'll auto-renew as long as neither party wants to back out. So if they don't like my sales, they I can cancel. If I don't like whatever, I could cancel. There's a mailing list. They use mailing lists to keep in touch with their writers. They send quarterly statements. They're going through a huge change in leadership right now. A lot of the senior editors have retired, and they're bringing in a whole new crew, it sounds like. So we'll see how things go in the next year.
Okay. So we talked about how you got the book into their hands for editing and stuff. What did they do for you and with you to sell the book?
Well, that's one of the problems with small press publishers.
Okay.
To be diplomatic. And I think a lot of the large publishing houses are like this now too. It's the marketing and promotion falls almost entirely on the writer. They've got a website, they've got a Facebook page, but apart from that, I don't think they do a lot to promote the books. I think a lot of that falls on me. What have I done? Well, that's something we could talk about another time.
So we've talked about this outside of the podcast before, but in general, and we'll probably make this into another podcast, but the authors have to market themselves a lot more than before.
Yeah.
But especially in small press, because there is no marketing department usually. Would that be correct?
From what I've read about small press, including mine, it seems like they're short-staffed. They're overworked. They have to do what they can, and a lot of their effort goes more into the production of the books. And I don't know how many queries they get. I'm sure they're busy.
So they were focusing on the book as opposed to the selling of it, which, unlike self-publishing, they are the ones doing it and letting you, we need this input, we need that input, but we're taking care of editing and designing and making sure it's in an EPUB or whatever format. So that is a difference between self-publishing and small press. Small press is closer to traditional.
It is. I think it's traditional publishing in a sense, or in most senses, I suppose. They list it everywhere it should be listed. They get the ISBN number. They pay the authors based on royalty instead of advance. Okay. I suppose is the biggest difference, and their market share is low. Like I think Wings gets. I think they're based out of Kentucky, and I think they said they get in some local bookstores there. But for the most part, a small press book isn't going to show up at Barnes and Noble,
and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
So these aren't vanity presses where you're paying for the privilege of them asking for more money.
Right. To get published at small press, you still go through a screening process. Mine, I believe they wanted to start with the query letter, and then they asked for 25 pages, and then they asked for a full manuscript. And I think that's pretty common. Back to vanity press, the one thing I like to tell people, you can tell a vanity press from a legitimate small publisher if you go to their webpage. If they're advertising their authors and their books, you'll know they're a legitimate press. If they're advertising what they can do for you as the author, they're more likely looking to make money from the author instead of making money for the author.
So instead of making money from the sale of whatever crap they're shoveling out.
Right.
To put it delicately.
Yeah, for vanity press, sure.
So here's a question also. The rights for your book.
Read your contract.
Okay.
That's important. My contract, while I'm under contract with Wings Press, they have right of first refusal on any sequels, prequels, spin-offs, anything like that.
For the book that they publish?
For that book only.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if I would choose to not sign a new contract, or if they would choose to not extend my contract, then I could market the book elsewhere or self-publish it. Otherwise, the contract they sent was pretty straightforward. Yeah. I didn't see any gotchas or anything. I know a lot of people who recommend, if you don't have an agent, have a lawyer of some sort. Can you help me out with this?
A lawyer who deals with copyright issues?
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
Read over the contract. I know some librarians that have had academic books through small publishers have said they had lawyers read over the contract before they signed it.
Yeah.
What I did with mine, I'm in the Nebraska Writers Guild, so I just talked to a few other small press writers there and had them look over the contract, and they said, yeah, it looks just like mine, so I just took their word for it.
So if you want to sell this book to a big later on, This particular book, not
This
future.
particular book, it'd have to be out of contract.
Okay.
I'd have to get an agent willing to take a previously published book and hope that I had sales enough to back up pitching it to a larger publisher.
So when you become the next Stephen King and they want Jason Bougger's original title,
There you go.
it's possible.
Yeah, that has happened, hasn't it? Authors
I'm
will
sure
have
it has.
smaller press stills, and then Stephen King, since you mentioned his name, he's been through several publishing houses over the decades or centuries or however long he's been alive.
So was it a rewarding experience for you?
Well, that's the weird thing. I've been writing for about 6 years now. I think I say 5, but I'm in age denial right now. So I'm probably closer to 6 or 7, and I've had a lot of short stories published, and nobody ever cared about that. It was kind of funny. It's like, oh yeah, so he writes, I don't know. But then as soon as I had this book out, all of a sudden I have my local newspapers talking to me, and all of a sudden my parents care now, and just, and all my friends who didn't really care about the writing, all of a sudden they're interested, and all of a sudden they're reading the book, and it's weird how a novel is so different than a short story in the eyes of the non-writing public, where I've got some short stories that I'm much more proud of than this novel, if that makes any sense, but people just don't want to read your short stories. So that's been rewarding. I like to say I haven't published novel. There's a little bit of ego to that as well.
Well, of course, otherwise you wouldn't do it, right?
Well, yeah, that's true. Everything we do is to feed our egos.
Well, okay, you wouldn't have even attempted to get it published if it didn't matter to you.
Yeah, that's true.
So many people will write something and then it just sits on their hard drive or file cabinet. So through this experience, would you, now you are under contract still, but let's say you weren't under contract, would you still look at small press for certain projects of yours?
Oh, as well as Wings has treated me, I think for this type of book, it's a young adult book. I think a young adult book would be more successful with a traditional large publisher than with a small press, only because young adult books are difficult to market to a large base because there's not a lot of them out there that sell. It's like everybody's reading Hunger Games, everybody's reading John Green. It's a hard place for new authors to make it, and in a small press, you're not out there, if that makes any sense at all, I guess.
Unless you do it yourself.
Yeah, and and to do it yourself for young adult is hard. You can't go hang around high schools if you're a 40-year-old man.
Yeah,
and say, buy my book, kids.
Yeah, that probably's not going to work well for you.
That won't end well.
No.
So it's a little more difficult because if you have a small press or a self-published book for adults or new adult, you can go sit in coffee shops and sell your books. It's hard to get to where the kids are to sell a young adult book. So that's why I think it's probably better in the long run to have a large publisher behind you to get you to the places where kids are going to be able to see you.
Interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Now this one, I'll talk a little bit about my own book here, since it's a spiritual paranormal. I thought, well, it's got Christian themes. Maybe there's churches. Well, I had no foresight to that because it's also full of foul language and cigarettes and stuff like that you're not going to go into a church and promoot. So,
no, probably not. Unless it's a story of redemption.
Yeah.
And then whoever it is cleans up their act. I'm not going to spoil it for you because I haven't finished it yet. But
marketing, anybody who ever asks what it's like being a writer, I think my stock answer is always the writing is the easy part. The hardest part is after you're done writing. It's the revisions and it's the marketing. And I clearly haven't mastered the marketing because I still have a day job.
Well, as do many
if
writers.
Not most writers, yeah. Sure.
So this has been interesting for me because for the longest time I was aware of big publishers and self-publishing. Mm-hmm. I had not thought of a middle ground as viable. And then I saw you do it. And again, there's that, for some reason, this uplifting of a writer's status when there's an actual book released, no matter where it came from. Mm-hmm. So it's been very interesting with this small press. One last question before we sign off. Do you know of resources for an author that might be interested in submitting to small press presses, where they can get a list of small presses and what they publish.
I would say start with a listing site like duotrope.com. Duotrope isn't free. It's $50 a year. There's other listing sites that are free. The Submission Grinder is one I can think of, which is real similar. And those are primarily short story sites. I found Wings through Duotrope. When you go to their listing, their search, you can search by length of your piece. So when I was looking for small press, I put novel.
Okay.
And I submitted to a few. Wings was the first one who took me. So.
And we'll talk more about choosing choosing teams later.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing at all. If I had any reservations about him, I wouldn't have signed a contract. So, but on Duotrope, I did find a lot of small press publishers there for all genres. On a quick side note, even if you have a novella and you don't know what to do with it, there's lots of publishers out there that take them. So,
excellent.
Find a listing site.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jason, for letting us pick your brains today. And I think that's all I had. I'm sure if there's questions for you, they can make comments on the website and other places, right?
Yeah, please do. And thanks for listening. Check back next time.
See ya.
See ya.